Amen. Well, we've been in this series now for a while, all the way since January. We've been in this series, and here it is, March. So we're actually coming down to the very end of the story, but like I said last week, we're in the juicy parts of the story. This is fun. But we've called this Pursuing Growth, and we've been looking at growth from a few different sides, but I'll tell you, it doesn't get more practical than what we're talking about this morning. We're talking about how to have healthy interpersonal relationships. Some of the healthiest, most mature people struggle with this area of life. And you can see their maturity in other ways and in other places, and yet the inability to have healthy family relationships, healthy friendships. Last week was for some of us who needed to hear about conscience, because some of us can be a little hardened in that way. And so last week was a breakthrough for those of us who are needing that. Today is kind of the opposite. Today is especially for those who are more sensitive. Need to hear what we're talking about today as far as having healthy relationships. Because as we look around us, relationships are failing at an incredibly high rate. And I don't just mean marriage relationships, but looking around our world, it's hard to have good, healthy friendships and family relationships, and we see so much being torn apart. So what does Scripture have to say about how to have healthy relationships? Specifically, how do we rebuild trust when we've been hurt deeply? That's what we're going to be looking at this morning. And so I just want to remind you where we've been, because it's really important, and some of you are probably tired of hearing the recap on Joseph's life, but it's important to hear. Was that a yeah? No. Oh, okay. You aren't tired of it. Good. I thought that was like, man, we're about to have a riot, which would be all right. So just need to, it'd shake things up at least, right? We need to remember where Joseph's been, because every aspect of his life all plays into what happens today. So you remember Joseph was born into this family in the Middle East that was a blended family. One dad had kids with 4 different women, and they're all together in this family, and you can imagine how that didn't work out well. But it especially didn't work out well because one of the women was dad's favorite. And so her 2 kids were his favorites. And Joseph is the oldest of those 2 kids. He gets all the special treatment, and the other brothers can't stand it. The other brothers, by the way, are really bad people, murderers. And so they decide, what am I going to do? What are we going to do with Joseph? How about we kill him? Problem solved. And then they decide, no, we won't kill him. We'll just sell him into slavery. Look, we're good people. So he winds up in slavery in Egypt, and God's hand is just on him every step of the way. Everything he does, God's blessing, and he goes from the worst position in Egypt up to in charge of everything. And then there's a false accusation against him, and he gets thrown in jail, and he's at the bottom. And then he winds up in charge of the jail, and eventually God brings him into this position where he's face to face with Pharaoh, and God gives him the ability to have insight into the future. And Pharaoh puts him in charge because a famine's coming, and Joseph, through God, has the solution for this problem that's coming. So Joseph now is in charge of all this food. They've collected in the abundance all this food, and now the entire Near Eastern world is all going down and getting food from Joseph in Egypt. He's the most powerful man outside of Pharaoh himself. And of all people who need food, who shows up last week but his brothers who 20 years ago sold him into slavery? He hasn't seen them. They don't know what's been going on. And how's he going to handle this? See, there's a couple ways that Joseph could have talked himself into handling this. Revenge sounds like a good idea, right? How about, now I have all the power. When I was growing up, my older brothers could bully me and push me around, and eventually, when I'm 17, sell me into slavery. How about now I can do whatever I want to them? Maybe God gave me this power just so I can exact some revenge, teach them a lesson. Do you like teaching people a lesson? Yeah, me too. You know, sometimes other drivers need to learn how you're supposed to drive. And so I can help you learn which lane you need to be, right? Like sometimes it's nice to be able to teach people a lesson. Pretty unhealthy approach. He could have gone that route. Or, I mean, think about it. He could have gone the total other route. He could have seen his brothers come in and gone, oh, this is what I've been missing for the last 20 years, my dad and my family, and I want everything to be okay. And so at the first sign that maybe they've changed a little bit, I'm just going to jump into that and say, oh, you've changed, and oh, I'm back, and everything's good. But that's not healthy either. So what we're looking at this morning, in fact, the whole tenor of these few chapters we're looking at today is all about trust. Trust is earned. We don't give trust away too quickly. At least we shouldn't give trust away too quickly. Trust is built up over time, and seeing that it's deserved, seeing that the person we're putting our trust in can be counted on to handle that well. And that's why when trust is broken, well, then we're left totally on quicksand in our relationship with the other person. There's no foundation anymore. And you can't just give trust right back when it's been broken. It has to be earned. There's a whole lot of mistrust going on in our story, and we're going to see through the eyes of mistrust as we go. But it doesn't actually start with Joseph. It starts with Joseph's dad, Jacob. That's what we're going to look at first, Jacob's mistrust. So if you brought a Bible, hopefully you did, please open it up. If you didn't, there should be one under a chair near you. Open up to the very first book in the Bible, Genesis is where we are. And we're not going to stand and read because we're covering 3 chapters today. So you can rest your legs. But if I do see you falling asleep, maybe I'll have you stand up for one of the verses. We'll see. But where we left off last week, the brothers go down. Joseph immediately recognizes the brothers. They don't recognize him. They don't know that it's Joseph. And Joseph talks to them through an interpreter, so they don't know that he knows their language. But he hears that they have regret. He hears them immediately as things don't go right. They immediately go to, I think this is punishment for what we did to Joseph all those years ago. So he hears, there's something going on. So when they go home, he gives them their money back and extra money for the provisions for the journey in their bags. But not all the brothers go back, because not all the brothers came down. One of the brothers didn't come, his full-blooded brother, Benjamin. The other of the privileged kids, the other of the favorites. Dad doesn't trust Benjamin with the other brothers. And so he didn't send Benjamin down with the rest. And Joseph wants to see his full-blooded brother, and we'll talk about more of why that is in a few minutes. But he wants to see him. So he says, go down and get him and bring him back. In fact, to make sure you do, how about one of you stays here in prison, the rest of you go and get that brother and bring him back. And it's also a bit of a test. Are they just going to abandon that brother? So they get home, And they tell Jacob, you are not going to believe what happened. This guy is strangely obsessed with our family structure. And we told him that we have all these brothers and that we're all brothers and that you're here and that we have one other brother. And he says we have to bring that one back. And Jacob says, no way. I'm not parting with him. Genesis 42, we'll just read a few verses, 36 through 38. So Simeon's down there in prison and they get back. And they tell Jacob all of this. Then their father Jacob said to them, you have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and you would take Benjamin? All these things are against me. Way to make it about you, Jacob. Then Reuben spoke to his father, saying, you may put my 2 sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my care and I will return him to you. But Jacob said, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead and he alone is left. If harm should befall him on the journey you are taking, then you will bring my gray hair down to Sheol, to the grave, in sorrow. So Reuben tries to work this out. By the way, I sullied Reuben's good name last week. Because I said in a passing comment that Reuben had suggested selling Joseph into slavery. No, Reuben suggested throw him into the pit. Judah suggested sell him into slavery. Reuben, you remember, he's the one who had the inappropriate relationship with his mother-in-law. And or with his stepmom, not mother-in-law, with his stepmom, and he was going to use Joseph as like a bargaining chip to get back in daddy's good graces. So I'm sorry that I sullied that good name by saying that he suggested the slavery. Judah did. But Reuben steps up here because he's the oldest, and he's like, all right, we've got to work this out. Simeon's in prison, but Jacob's like, Simeon's already dead, just like Joseph. Forget him down there. You are not taking Benjamin from me. And so Reuben says, well, here, let me give you a guarantee. You know what would be cool, Dad? How about if I don't follow through? How about if you kill a couple of your grandkids? Would that make it better? And Jacob's like, no, killing people is not the solution. What is your problem? Right? No, you are not going. And Jacob, he does not trust Benjamin with these brothers, rightly so. But remember, he doesn't know that the brothers did anything to Joseph. He doesn't know what happened there. Really, Jacob just doesn't trust God. And he's become the ultimate helicopter parent here. Like, I'm going to bubble wrap Benjamin. I'm not going to let him go anywhere or do anything. He's a grown adult at this point. We kind of think of him like he's 5 years old. Like, he's in his 20s. You can handle, if the other brothers can handle this, you can handle this. But no, Jacob will not trust Benjamin to go. Boy, as a parent, it is really easy to think, if I just do all these things, I can protect my kids. So much is out of our control. Our kids ultimately are in God's hands and not in ours. So let's see what happens. Beginning of 43. Now the famine was severe in the land, so it came about when they'd finished eating the grain. So now they went down, they got the food. Simeon stayed in prison. They've kind of abandoned him down there because of what Jacob said. They've been eating it up in the Palestine area that they're in, and then they run out of food. Then their father says to them, go back, buy us a little food. So Judah speaks to him because it was not working out with Reuben. Judah says, the man solemnly warned us, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you send our brother with us, we'll go down and buy you food. But if you don't send him, we won't go down. For the man said to us, you won't see my face unless your brother's with you. Then Israel, that's Jacob, said, why did you treat me so badly by telling the man... This guy drives me nuts. By telling the man that you still had another brother. And they said, the man questioned particularly about us and our relatives, saying, is your father still alive? Have you another brother? So we answered his question. Could we possibly know that he would say, bring your brother down? Judah said to his father Israel, send the lad with me. We will arise and go, that we may live and not die. We're starving to death here, Dad. We, as well as you and our little ones, I myself will be surety for him. You may hold me responsible for him. If I don't bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame before you forever. For if we had not delayed, surely by now we could have returned twice. Dad. Then their father Israel said to them, isn't it cool to see like family relationships? It's all the same through the years. Then their father Israel said to them, if it must be so, then do this. Take some of the best products of the land in your bags and carry them down to this man as a present. A little balm, a little honey, aromatic gum, and myrrh, pistachio nuts. Now we're talking. And almonds. Take double the money in your hand and take back in your hand the money that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake. Take your brother also and arise, return to the man, and may God Almighty grant you compassion in the sight of the man so that he will release to you your other brother and Benjamin. And as for me, if I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. So the men took this present. They're like, you heard Dad, well, let's go. And so they took the presents and they head down to Egypt and they stand before Joseph. Jacob finally lets go because they're starving to death. So now let's talk about Joseph's trust. Because Joseph has already now seen, wow, they seemed like they were happy to leave this other brother in prison for a really long time. So what's gone on in the character of my brothers over the last 20 years? So here's what happens. I'll summarize what goes on in the rest of the chapter here. They show up. Joseph sees that Benjamin is with them, so he immediately sets up a feast in his house. And he says, invite them to come over. We're going to have a big banquet in my house. Now, it's funny. You remember when the brothers opened up their sacks last week and they saw the money in the top of their sacks? What was their reaction? Oh, no. Why did God do this to us? Like free money. They're like, God's punishing us. Like I said last week, I'm like, God, punish me like that, right? But it's because they have this guilty conscience in them. They know they've done something wrong. So as soon as anything happens that's out of the ordinary, they're like waiting for the other shoe to drop. So they get invited to this big banquet. And what's their immediate reaction? Verse 18 of 43. Now the men, these are the brothers, were afraid because they were brought to Joseph's house, and they said, it's because of the money that was returned in our sacks the first time that we're being brought in, that they may seek occasion against us and fall upon us and take us for slaves with our donkeys. Like not only us, but our donkeys. It is funny that as soon as things go wrong, they go, what if somebody sells us into slavery? They have some major guilty conscience going on. They're like, why are we going to this guy's house? He's going to turn us into a slave. And it's interesting how God will at times use somebody who isn't even following him or somebody who has a very basic understanding of him to break through out of the mouths of babes at times, to break through what we're not understanding. Remember, this is the chosen family who God is going to bless the world through. They should be following and understanding God more than anybody else on earth at the time. And yet these things happen and they're immediately saying, oh, God's going to do something bad. I don't know what's going to happen. They go walking in and they talk to Joseph's servant there, and they say, his attendant, they say, hey, for some reason we got the money back in our sacks, and so that's a big problem, so we brought it back again in case it was a mistake. And it's interesting, verse 23, I think it is here. He talks to them about it, and he says, be at ease, don't be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money. Then he brought Simeon out to them. He says, don't worry. God is in charge of what's going on here. So then Joseph arrives, the feast begins, and they look around and they realize, oh, we've been seated around this table, and somehow we were seated from oldest to youngest around this table. And they're looking, they're like, how in the world did this happen? And then Benjamin, they start bringing out food, and they're like, here's food for you, here's food for you, here's food for you. And they go all the way along, and they get to Benjamin, and they're like, here's food for you, and here's more for you, and here's more for you, and here's more for you, and here's more. And they give him 5 times as much food as the rest of the brothers, as the brothers are just watching this happen right in front of them. Now, what is going on here? Is Joseph just playing favorites just like his dad does? I don't think so. I think that there's something a lot deeper going on in the relationship with Benjamin. And it starts with, why did he want Benjamin to come down there to begin with? I think he wanted Benjamin to come down there because he knew what his life was like growing up as the son of daddy's favorite wife. He knew what a helicopter parent daddy is, and he also knows how those brothers treated him all growing up. And he's thinking, now I'm not there to look out for my little brother. What's his life like now? How miserable is he? I need to get him out of that awful situation. That's what I think's going on. I think he wanted to see his brother, to see, is he okay? Or do I need to rescue out of him? Because now Joseph has the means to give Benjamin a good life. Joseph has the means to get him away from all these terrible people who were doing all these terrible things, and he knows what it was like. So he's like, let me bring him down here and see for myself. And he organizes a test. You know what? I'm going to treat him way better. This is his multicolored coat moment. I'm going to treat Benjamin way better than all the other brothers, and I'm going to see, how do they treat him? I'm going to watch. Because remember, Joseph can understand their language, but they don't know it. So they think, when they're talking to each other, they think that nobody can understand them. But Joseph's listening, and Joseph's watching. Is their jealousy going to come out? Are they going to treat him badly? How are they looking at him? How are they talking to each other? How are they going to treat him when they think nobody else is looking? This is a test of how the brothers are going to respond. And he's watching, and he's listening. Is Benjamin really safe with them? But there's more to come, because there's one more test. The next chapter, the slavery test. So they finish eating, they finish their big party together, and the next morning they get their food and they head back out, and they're like, this whole place is so weird. Like, we went down. Can you imagine you wait in line at Safeway, you get up there and the checker's like, oh, tell me your family tree. And you're like, I just want these Hot Pockets. Like, that's the only reason I'm here. Oh, really? Now, how old's your dad now? And asking all these questions. And then you go back to the store and they're like, oh, before you can buy your Hot Pockets, here, come over to my house. We're going to have a party together. And it's like, don't want the party, just want the food. So they do the party. They get Simeon back. Benjamin's still with them. And they hightail it back. We are out of here. We have our food. We're done. But Joseph says, hey, put their money back in their bags like before. I think he is enjoying messing with them. Put their money back in their bags like before, but take something special of mine. Take this silver cup of mine and put it in the top of Benjamin's bag, and then seal them all up. So that happens. They're riding out, and as soon as they get out of town, Joseph sends the cops after them. Go pull them over. and go search their stuff. So they go and they get there and they say, hey, the cops say, hey, you stole something. After how nice he was to you, you stole something from him. And the brothers are like, we don't want to rock the boat at all with this guy. He is so weird. We did nothing. Everything's fine. And they're like, no. He had this special cup and it was there and now it's gone. And they're like, we don't know anything about a special cup. Search our stuff. If you find it here, you could kill us all. We'll all be your slaves. The person whose bag it's in, if you find it, they'll be your slave forever. How about that? Search our stuff. And so they search, and it's just like at the dinner. They start with the oldest, and then the next, and then the next, and then the next, and then they get to Benjamin's, and they open it up, and there's the cup sitting in the top. What did you do? And he's like, I didn't do anything. But they're totally broken at this point. They just gather up all their stuff, and they head back in, and they fall face down in front of this Joseph guy that they don't know is their brother. And there's a deep understanding of the transformation that's gone on in their character in the interactions that happen. Chapter 44, verse 16. So Judah says to them, what can we say to my Lord? What can we speak? How can we justify ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of your servants. Behold, we are my Lord's slaves, both we and the one in whose possession the cup has been found. But Joseph said, far be it from me to do this. The man in whose possession the cup has been found, he shall be my slave. But as for you, go in peace to your father. Then Judah approached him and said, oh, my Lord, may your servant please speak a word in my Lord's ear. Don't be angry with your servant, for you are equal to Pharaoh. Joseph says, the rest of you, you're free to go. I'm just going to keep Benjamin. I'm going to keep him as a slave, and you all get to leave as totally innocent in all of this. And who's doing all the talking now? Reuben's given up. Reuben can't work these things out. It's Judah. And Judah, the very one who argued to put Joseph into slavery, is now going to argue to keep Benjamin out of slavery. Here's what happens at the end of the chapter, starting in 27. He kind of lays out, hey, we went home, we talked to our dad, this is how it all went. And then starting in 27, he says, your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. And the one went out from me, and I said, surely he is torn in pieces, and I have not seen him since. This is the first time that Joseph knows his dad thinks he's dead. His dad thinks he was ripped apart by animals. You wonder, did Joseph wonder, how come dad didn't send somebody to come get me out of Egypt? My brothers sold me into slavery. Why didn't he organize a search party? Why didn't he come down and try to buy me back? And you wonder, how many times was Joseph walking around and looking to see, is my dad here to get me out of this? And he never showed up. This is the first time in 20 years that Joseph finds out, oh, dad thought I was dead the whole time. Verse 28, verse 29. If you take this one also, Benjamin, from me, and harm befalls him, you will bring my gray hair down to Sheol in sorrow. Now, therefore, when I come to your servant, my father, and the lad is not with us, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, when he sees that the lad isn't with us, he'll die. Dad can't handle losing his other favorite son. Thus, your servants will bring the gray hair of your servant, our father, down to Sheol in sorrow. For your servant became surety for the lad to my father, saying, if I don't bring him back to you, then let me bear the blame before my father forever. Now, therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad, a slave to my Lord. Let the lad go up with his brothers, For how shall I go up to my father if the lad isn't with me? For fear that I see the evil that would overtake my father." Judah, after selling Joseph into slavery, now he's saying, "I'll serve as a slave forever to keep Benjamin out of slavery." He is totally changed. So what is Joseph doing here? This is a very specific test. He's thought this through. And he's come up with, how can I put them in a situation that's as close as possible to the situation they put me in 20 years ago? I'm going to cook up a scenario where they have the option of leaving Benjamin in slavery and it making their lives better, and I'm going to see, are they going to take the deal? That's what they did 20 years ago. They cooked it up. I'm just going to hand it to them on a silver platter. Here you go. Slavery for Benjamin, freedom and wonder and everything great for you. Are you going to do it? And now he sees there's been a total transformation in them over the last 20 years. We don't know why. We aren't given the pieces there. But the brothers finally care about somebody other than themselves. The whole argument is, how could we let this happen to our family? They've developed empathy. And we've been talking about the incredible transformation in Joseph's position from a lowest to second in command in all of Egypt, but the transformation that's gone on in these brothers' hearts is even more miraculous. From cold-blooded killers who didn't bat an eye selling their brother into slavery, to now being willing, I will be imprisoned as a slave forever in order to save him out of that. Only God could have done that. They pass the last test, the slavery test. So next week, we get to see Joseph's response. Cliffhanger. Sorry. But there's a lot that we got to talk about here, because we want to get to restoration and forgiveness, and we'll get there. But we got to talk about boundaries today. That's the big part of what's going on in this story. What we're seeing here is a vital part of interpersonal relationships. Joseph doesn't know their current character, but he does know these were really unsafe people in the past. He has boundaries with them until he can test and see whether he can really trust them or not. And you even see Joseph being really careful. Back in chapter 43, when they come in to sit down for the feast, he comes in, and in verse 26, Joseph came home. They brought into the house with him and presented him the present which was in their hand, and bowed to the ground before him. The narrator keeps pointing out how they're bowing down to Joseph, which is awesome, because that was the dream that he had in the beginning, right? Then he asked them about their welfare and said, "Is your old father well, of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" And they said, "Your servant, our father, is well. He's still alive." They bowed down in homage. Then he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son. And he said, "Is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me?" And they said, "May God be gracious to you." And he said, "May God be gracious to you, my son." Then Joseph hurried out, for he was deeply stirred over his brother, and he sought a place to weep, and he entered his chamber and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out, and he controlled himself and said, "Serve the meal." We saw this in Joseph last week. He's a deeply emotional man. But he knows, I'm not safe to be emotional in front of these people. I'm going to come up with a way where I can still let my emotions out. I'm not going to hide them. I'm going to express them, but I'm going to do it in a way that's safe and shielded from unsafe people. So let's talk a bit about the boundaries that Joseph exemplified. The first thing is this. This is important. Remembering is not revenge. And here's what I mean. We'll talk about forgiveness next week, but someone somewhere along the line had the stupid idea of tying together forgive and forget. I don't know who that was, but that's a terrible idea. And we all know it practically. If you have me come over and babysit your kids, and then you come home a few hours later and you find me out in the backyard just scrolling on my phone, and you're like, where are the kids? And I'm like, I don't know. And so you go upstairs and you find out, oh, they snuck out, went to 7-Eleven, and they got like 50 Slurpees, and they've just been pounding Slurpees since they got back, and I didn't even know what was going on. You shouldn't have me babysit again, right? Don't forgive and forget. You could forgive, but forgive and remember, right? Just remembering the wrong that was done isn't revenge. Now, I will say it could be revenge, and we'll talk a lot about that next week. We'll get really, really practical into how to make sure that we don't fall into the trap of revenge and bitterness. But merely remembering what happened isn't in itself vengeful. In fact, it can be necessary. It's necessary for us to protect ourselves against unsafe, unhealthy people. Joseph remembers their slavery. He remembers how they treated him. And so he says, I'm going to check and test and make sure that they aren't going to do anything like that again. I'm going to protect my brother if it's within my means from these unsafe people. And that's okay. Remembering what happened isn't necessarily revenge. But testing does reveal character. Joseph says something interesting in chapter 44, verse 15. Judah and his brothers come back to Joseph's house. He was still there. They fell on the ground before him. And Joseph says to them, what's this deed that you've done? Don't you know that a man such as I can practice divination? And he kind of has this vague reference to, I can know more of what's going on than you think I do. But he isn't using some weird voodoo spiritual force to do it. He's using wisdom. He's looking and he's listening and he's asking questions and he's watching their responses to situations. And he's being wise, knowing their history and character to see, has there been genuine change or has there not been? Now, that doesn't mean that you set people up to fail. It doesn't mean you try to trap them or get them to slip up. But it does mean that you give them an opportunity to show that they've really changed in that area. Our goal is restoration of relationship, right? But you can't put in all the work of restoration. The other person has to change if they're the one that's wronged you. And again, we'll be talking more about that next week. But Jesus talked about this. He used that phrase in Matthew 10:16, be wise as serpents and innocent as doves, right? In other words, don't be a fool and get taken advantage of. Be wise as a serpent. Be intelligent in your dealings with people, but be innocent in what you're doing. Don't be trying to set them up to fail and do the wrong thing and fall. But be smart about it. Don't just charge in. And that's the thing with setting healthy boundaries. This happens a lot with Christians. One trap that Christians can fall into is feeling like, well, in order for me to be loving, then I have to go along with others in whatever they want. And I'm not able to say no. But saying no is a healthy thing that we need to be able to do. You have the right to make the choice to say no. And all boundaries are is being able to differentiate for yourself, this is the zone that I'm responsible for, and I'm going to choose how I'm responsible for that. You can make the choice in how people do or don't touch you. You can have a physical boundary of this is okay and this isn't okay. And we know that. You can enforce that. The same thing is true for our emotions. You can have a boundary to protect yourself from other people's negative or unhealthy emotional actions towards you. That's okay. In fact, it's good to have those emotional boundaries, mental boundaries, spiritual boundaries. You aren't doing something wrong by saying, this is okay within my sphere and this isn't okay. Now, we have to be careful about how we go about doing that. You can't just do it in anger, right? Everything's going along fine and then suddenly, no, stop, right? Whoa. No, communicate clearly ahead of time. This is the expectation. This is the boundary. Don't do it in anger. Also, don't do it in spite as a way to get back at somebody, right? So think about the raising kids idea. It is perfectly acceptable to have the conversation with somebody who takes your kids, who's watching them part of the time. It's perfectly acceptable to say, here are a couple things that are important to us in our family, and when you're with the kids, we need you to reinforce that, to reinforce those things. We don't let the kids watch movies like this or this movie. And if you find out, oh no, they were doing that behind your back when they had the kids, it's okay to say, we need to have a conversation about this. That's not okay to do. We would love for you to spend time with our kids, but this is not okay, and there's a consequence there. If this continues, then you can't spend time with our kids. We want you to. We're just explaining it. Now, spite would be, oh, well, now you can't do that, and now I'm going to do this to you too, or I'm going to punish you by just taking them away and not letting, you can't even come over to our house to see them or anything like that. That's spite. That isn't boundaries. Boundaries is just clearly communicating this is okay and this isn't okay. And then the most important thing with boundaries is consistency. Stick with it. It's not okay for you to talk to me like that. And I'm going to need to remove myself from the situation if you're going to start using that language towards me. It's okay to have those boundaries. If you haven't read the book Boundaries by Henry Cloud and John Townsend, I highly, highly recommend. It is a fantastic Christian book on this idea of boundaries. And it's something that all of us as Christians should know and recognize. It is okay to have those healthy boundaries. Joseph understood it. That's how he interacted with his brothers all the way along. All right, last thing in here. We've been talking about trust and testing those who have broken our trust before we just jump back into trusting them. But ultimately, trust starts with God. And there's two quick things I want to point out here. First off, the way the story is told, there's the interplay of several different words. Treasure pops up several times. But I want to focus in on the word shalom. Shalom, the Hebrew word for peace. The idea of peace is over and over and over, all the way from the beginning of the story. At the very beginning, we were told that the brothers hated Joseph and that they couldn't speak kindly to him. It actually says they couldn't speak shalom to him. There was no interpersonal peace between them. Then Jacob sends Joseph to Shechem to check on the shalom of his brothers, to check on their welfare. Then the steward, when they're there, and we read that interaction with the steward today, and they say, oh, we found the money and we brought it back, we don't know what happened. He says, shalom be on you. Peace. Chill. It's okay. Your God has been looking out for you this whole time. And at the end, Joseph says, you can leave Benjamin in slavery and you can go off to Shalom with your dad if you want. There's no peace in their lives, and they're looking for peace all the way around. But God is the one who's working to bring a different kind of peace, a transformational peace that none of the human characters in the story could bring about on their own. We can spend our whole lives seeking peace, but only find it when we surrender to God and truly entrust the things in our life into His hands. And then when everything's against you. Jacob, at the very beginning of our story, they come home and they say, here's all the food, we got the money back. The guy down there just wants to see Benjamin face to face. And Jacob says, everything's against me, right? Is everything against Jacob? Look what God's been working out. Jacob's sitting up there with no idea that he's going to have no food and his whole family's going to starve to death. Oh, God's been working out a food plan so you're going to have plenty of food. You had no idea. Oh, and by the way, that son that you thought was dead, God's about to bring him back into your life. Oh, and by the way, God's put him in this incredible position, the second most powerful man in the entire ancient Near East, your son. God's been doing that. And in fact, all the brokenness in your family relationships, how ugly everything's been, and you don't even know how ugly it's been, Jacob. It's been really ugly. God's been working all of that around for your good. And from Jacob's eyes, everything's against me. But in reality, God has been doing everything behind the scenes to bring incredible transformation in the lives of this family. God's been at work all the way along. But if we're honest, sometimes we look at our lives and we just say, God's left me. Everything's against me. And trust, real trust, is looking at it and seeing, oh, I may not see it right now, but I know the character of God. Because we said trust is revealed through testing, right? So Joseph has been testing his brothers to see, can I trust this transformation in them or not? Well, can you trust God or not? Have you seen God tested in your life and seen Him come through for you? When everything is against you, you may not see it right now. You may not see it for years. You may not see it this side of eternity, but God is at work. So what? It's been a really practical sermon, so I'm just drawing attention to a couple things. First is to create and maintain healthy boundaries in your life. This is for your health first, but also for the health of those around you. We need to be relationally healthy people. And it starts by having clearly communicated and understood boundaries. And maybe you don't know, is this a good boundary or not to have in this relationship? Is it okay for me to tell this person in my life this or that? Reach out to a godly person you know and ask them to pray about that with you and speak that in. Sometimes, in order to get the clearest perspective on things, we need an outside perspective. Create and maintain healthy boundaries. And then the other one is this: find safety in God. You might not be safe with others. You might not be safe with people that you live with emotionally. But you can be Joseph and run and be your full self with God, even if you have to leave the room to do it. God doesn't leave you. God loves you unconditionally, and He's there with open arms. So, the test of that love was when Jesus was willing to come and die on the cross in our place. We get to end our time this morning together by taking communion.